IPD, LEED, BIM, P3, CLT, Net Zero, Carbon Neutral, Data Mining, Blockchain, LiDAR, Drones, 3D Printing, the Cloud, Apps, 5G, and on and on. The list of possible innovations that can impact construction, that stakeholders can participate or try to tackle in construction is endless. And on this episode of the Construction Record, episode 91, we're going to explore just that, industry innovations. So let's get started. For this episode, we've interviewed 4 different folks that have connections with the construction industry. The 4 interviewees all bring different perspectives and thoughts and opinions on industry innovation and how construction can participate in it, how they can succeed at it, and what they can do to avoid some of the most likely failures or challenges that will probably come their way. Because to innovate in an industry which is as old as time itself, to innovate in an industry that has resulted and built in things such as the aqueducts of Rome, the pyramids in Egypt, the Great Wall of China, things that are just so bricks and mortar, nails and hammers and wood. The basics of construction never really change, but how you implement, how you plan out your processes, how you execute on a project does. And in particular, since the COVID-19 pandemic has taken root, the one thing we've noticed here at the Construction Record is that there's an ever-growing thirst from industry stakeholders to try to find better efficiencies and better ways of doing things. This was always a challenge every year. We always write about innovation in the industry, innovation in construction, but it seems since the pandemic has forced the industry's hands and society's hands in general on how to operate differently or how to look at operating differently, we've seen a lot more questions coming our way, a lot more different pitches around story ideas or podcast ideas that explore innovation or types of innovation in construction. So we took it upon ourselves for this episode 91, to totally dedicate it to industry innovations. The release of this episode ties in with our actual monthly feature that's appearing in both the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, and that feature is aptly called Industry Innovations. So who you're going to hear from in this episode are 4 different folks we've interviewed over the last few weeks for the podcast itself. And with each of those interviewees, we explored innovation in construction and what it takes, and in particular their role and experiences and what they did to innovate and try to find success. So we'll kick off this episode with a clip from my conversation with Barry LePatner. He is an American construction reform guru. Barry and I spoke, let's say now it's probably mid-July, late July, and we had talked about what he was positing out around supply chains and construction and what the industry, both in the US and Canada, need to do in order to adjust to the new reality that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought upon us. And one of those things Barry mentioned was innovation. That, yes, there are going to be new technologies and new processes resulting from this industry trying to work within the parameters of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that now is the time for those firms to really start to engage and embrace this type of innovation. My question and part of our conversation was, how do you do that with an industry that almost 80% of it, whether it's in the US or Canada, are still mom and pop shops, folks that have 1 to 20 employees and are used to doing things the way they do them, and they do them really well that way. So with that, I'll take you to Barry's comments about the current landscape as he sees it in construction and where innovation comes in.
This is the perfect opportunity for small and medium-sized firms to use this time to reset the way they do business. Because if you study what was time-consuming, what is inefficient, and what has held you back in the past, you can identify specific parts of your business that technology can make the difference on. And when we get back to some new sense of normal, and that will not be until mid to late 2021, that's the truth, and you have to get used to that if you're in shock over what I just said. If you are positioning yourself to have technology that can track product deliveries and keep that tracking in front of you and the clients so that they're assured of it, if you can have a process that shows that you are only ordering from companies that have proven to be solvent, if you can show how you're coordinating the process of purchase orders all the way through delivery, insurability, and installation with technology, which you learned about and you mastered over the next few months into next year, you're going to be positioned much better to get new business and to be relied on as someone who's in touch with the way business is done throughout the world, and which is not normally done in the construction world.
So, as you heard in that conversation with Barry, the term the perfect storm comes up. And I have to admit, my writers and myself, we've heard quite a bit of this idea that now is the time, now is the perfect storm for construction to consider how they can innovate and change things due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That it's now the time to review your processes and procedures, since everybody else is probably doing the same thing as they try to figure out how to work remotely and how to work safely on their sites. Now that leads me to my next conversation, safety. I spoke with Adrian Bartha of eCompliance, a leading safety software provider in North America. And my conversation with Adrian was about innovation in the safety software and the safety space, but also that type of innovation within the context of what's happening right now with COVID-19. Because OH&S has always been paramount for construction. You hear it all the time, that safety is important. Everyone wants to have everyone return home from their day at work. But now put in a pandemic on top of all the other dangers that exist on a construction site. And the question gets asked, how do we do this? How do we do it effectively? How do we do it efficiently? How do we innovate our safety processes on the fly in response to a pandemic? And Adrian had some interesting thoughts based on what he's been hearing through his conversations with partners and stakeholders. And we take you to that right now. Here's Adrian Bartha of eCompliance.
Construction historically got a bad rap with adopting new innovations. But in defense of the industry, I think a lot of the products that people thought would be super innovative years ago just weren't ready or weren't built for construction. And now you're starting to see products built for and by the industry. And I think the products are better for engaging the industry and people in the industry. And with better products, you get better adoption. So I really put it on the firms that are coming up with the products. It's up to them to come up with something that is exciting and valuable, and we're starting to see that, which is really exciting, and the industry's picking it up. I think there is a general shift to digitization for key business processes across the construction industry. And the pandemic has forced a lot of organizations to accelerate some of their digital plans that they might have thought would have taken 12 months or 2 years to really speed up in a number of weeks. And for many of the organizations we work with, they were already on that path, but they just had to go faster at it. But one of the interesting things that I think does get overlooked often is it's not just digitizing stuff. Digitizing stuff doesn't necessarily make it better. It's the exploring the processes, the business processes that are implicit in all this stuff. So we've seen a lot of organizations strengthen their business process and how they communicate certain things because they have to in order to make it digital, in order to work in a more remote fashion. So that's been an interesting thing is businesses question some of the old assumptions of how they used to operate and reevaluate all those processes. Because getting those processes right means you can do digital right, but if you don't get the processes right across the company, you're not don't have conviction on them, it's hard to go digital 100%.
There you have it, folks. From that Adrian conversation, one of the salient points that I take, and hopefully you do too, is that innovation is more than just a declaration. That it takes time to build in redundancies and to attempt to try to do things differently or introduce things differently into your business, no matter what your role is in construction. So coming up next is Noah Dolgoy. He is of Tread. Tread is a digital platform that assists in moving construction materials easier and faster and more effectively. Noah can go on about innovation. He has some great ideas and some great thoughts, not just on innovation in construction, but in a few other industries as well. And in particular, what I wanted to explore with Noah is just that, at the crux of this term, innovation. And then when you put innovation with construction, they really are contrasts as far as people's perceptions. And Noah explores that a bit more in the context of how his app, his platform Tread, and how they rolled it out in the construction, and what he learned, and what other people need to keep in mind when they're thinking of introducing something new into the construction space. Without further ado, here's Noah Dolgoy of Tread.
There's an art and a science to it. I'm not going to say that we have it all figured out by any means, but I think what we did at the beginning, when I said we sort of were thinking about marketplaces, is that came from a place of like, we know better, right? And I think that was an error for us, and I think other companies that have entered the space have made similar errors. And I think we also got really fixated on sort of these, like, the very small number of giant enterprise businesses, and so. What that meant was we really weren't paying attention to the big, the big middle of the industry where we have all these people who are very proud of what they're doing. They're feeding their families. They've been doing it a particular way. It's been working for them. They've been, in many cases, incredibly successful. But their businesses are, by the industry standards, pretty small. So that being said, I mean, in construction, a mid-sized business could be $1 billion company that you've never heard of, right? But what we found was really helpful was we just started, we've designed our product and our focus around gradual change. So we think we invest energy in understanding how people are doing things, and instead of approaching it like a lot of technology companies do, which is to come in and say, what you're doing is wrong, we're going to disrupt it. Instead, we come in and say, what you're doing is actually probably right. How do we supplement it? Like, how do we help along? And so what we found in a lot of the companies we go into, particularly the family ones, is there's a big demographic shift happening, where, it might have been the founder or the child of the founder who's been running it is now turning it over to, a Gen Z, like a millennial or a Gen Z child who went to business school, is using a smartphone, is really data focused. But it might be that older person who's looking at other traditional industries that have had technology applied into them, and they've been able to really make a mental leap and say, let's bridge forward and let's create some change. Now, that being said, we're still in like category creation phase of what we're doing. Like, I think we're still really, most of our clients, or almost all of our clients, are very early adopters still. So I think that big middle of the industry is still like learning how to adopt things like us. But for us, like, it's treating it from a point of education. It's asking lots of questions. It's designing a product that's going to be comfortable for people who have a way of doing things, and where we can recommend and nudge changes towards efficiency, as opposed to coming in and saying like, oh, we're going to Uberify this, or we're going to deploy artificial intelligence that's going to change everything tomorrow. Like, that doesn't make people feel comfortable.
Of the 4 conversations we had in support of this Industry Innovations podcast, that point raised by Noah around one of the issues with folks that come into construction to innovate it is that they sometimes come in with the approach that they know better, and they try to kind of bolt on and institute their innovation into the industry as the silver bullet, as the solution, without really taking into context and trying to understand better their clients' needs or their clients' businesses' needs. That's kind of a mistake that you see repeated. And it's not just in construction or the innovators that come into construction. We've seen it even in my field, in journalism. With the early onset of data and the web, yes, newspapers was this old trade in an old sector that was stuck in these old processes of print. But in those early adoption days of the web and understanding clicks and views better, a lot was sacrificed to folks that came in saying, we know better, this is how it's done. And you've seen a lot of recalibration since those early days. And we see it with construction as well now. As we kind of move forward, the more innovators and technology that we see that gets brought into the industry doesn't come from that we know better approach or mindset. Some of the most successful ones are the ones that really try to understand their clients' needs at a more granular level. And to use that term that Noah used, kind of nudge people in a certain direction and to augment and complement their processes. And that leads me to our next speaker, which is Mallorie Brodie of Bridgit. Those of you that may not be familiar with Bridgit is one of the more successful startup companies in construction over the last decade. They started out as a check-off software app and provider, and their business has just grown. Grown to the point now where they recently released Bridgit Bench, which is more of a resource management software. So, because once again, Bridgit did what we're kind of hinting at here. They listened to their clients. They listened to their own clients and the innovation that they needed in their processes, and decided to put something to market. So with Mallorie, it was Warren Fry of the Journal of Commerce who did the interview with Mallorie. And the point we're going to lead into here is a point where Mallorie is echoing a bit what Noah just said around the scalability and the adaptability of something that you bring into construction is key. That an innovative product has to have that scalability and adaptability in order to be accepted, let alone be successful. Here you go. Here's Mallorie Brodie of Bridgit.
We have customers on our Bridgit Bench product that are 30-person companies, and then we also have companies that have 10,000 employees across North America. So we are currently working with companies of all sizes. I would say the biggest difference is around the pain point that they're trying to solve. So often the 30-person companies, they're owner operated. It's, a business owner that's wearing 5 different hats. They have to be jumping around to, different meetings and different priorities that they have. So they're really looking to make themselves be as efficient as possible. And if we can make their workforce planning process more efficient, then that buys them back hours in the day, and they are all on board with that. Whereas some of the larger companies, what they're really trying to do is across their workforce, they don't have key performance indicators and metrics that are easy for them to track for so many individuals in their company. So they're more interested in the reporting functionality and the analytics functionality within our product, as opposed to just the time savings piece.
As we head into the last interview clip for this Industry Innovations podcast, we continue with Mallorie Brodie of Bridgit. What I found interesting in that conversation that Warren and Mallorie had about Bridgit and its evolution is that the firm always has remained cognizant of the fact that for them to be successful, they need to be able to adapt, but also create partnerships. And you know how earlier in this podcast I talked about how construction and innovation, they're two words that contrast. What we have found through our coverage of innovation in construction in particular is that there are groups and sectors and leaders in the construction industry that are willing to share their best practices and their innovations for the betterment of the industry. But there's quite a few that, in the end, it comes down to the bottom line and proprietary knowledge. And why would I share an innovation or a technology that I have in my business practice that gives me an edge? We've seen that argument done before, made before. We've seen it made when CCA, the Canadian Construction Association, helped launch CC Innovations, an innovation hub that is its direction was that information sharing of best practices. And some of the early challenges that group faced was exactly that. You had people that were open-minded, willing to share, but then you also had segments of the industry that were just not interested in sharing their competitive advantage. Because in the end, it's about the bottom line and the success of their firm. Arguments can be made existentially, I guess, that, the health and benefit of multiple firms means the industry remains healthy and everybody remains healthy as an industry and as a business proposition. So Mallorie continues exploring that a little bit with Warren in this upcoming clip. Here we are.
Technology moves so quickly, and construction tech has been such an interesting place to be in because I think it's really evolved in terms of the way partnerships work in the industry. So initially, everyone was really, working very individually in silos at separate companies. Mm-hmm. And I think we've all realized that, we can bring the industry along so much faster if we are forming partnerships. And so, we're a partner with Procore. We have partnerships with some of the other companies in the space as well. And ultimately, it's better if we can all, focus on certain areas and be the absolute best and really deliver on a great customer experience for, the specific products we currently offer. And it's okay for other companies to do some things that you don't do, just to try and eliminate the overlap. So yeah, we've had, an excellent experience working with some different partners. And I think it will ultimately allow the construction industry to innovate and move that much faster and go through this digital transformation process that much faster if we're all working together.
If you've made it this far into our Industry Innovations podcast, I thank you. If you're an innovator in the construction space, if you're someone in the construction space looking to innovate, I hope some of the anecdotes and intel shared in this episode will help inform your future decisions. Safe to say, can't really encapsulate and capture the essence of innovation in construction through just 4 interviews in one podcast. So while we've been piecing this podcast together, we've already started interviewing a few other innovators and people involved in the innovation space in construction for a second podcast solely dedicated to industry innovations. You'll see that coming out sometime this fall. One thing I'd like everyone to keep in mind is that if you have a theme or an idea or you want to provide feedback to us on this particular podcast or any podcast, you can email us at editor@dailycommercialnews.com or editor@journalofcommerce.com. Please send your feedback, your ideas there. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to discuss amongst our podcast team and with you anything that may have some potential to appear on our podcast. Before I sign off, I just want to thank everyone that took the time to talk with Warren and I. Those individual podcasts with Noah Dolgoy, with Barry LePatner, with Adrian Bartha, and with Mallorie Brodie. You can find all those podcasts at our podcast page at dcnonl.com or joconl.com, or you can find them on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube. We really had fun pulling this together. It's the first of what I think will be many theme-based podcasts that we're going to be rolling out to the industry. We want to tell your stories, and we want to help inform you and entertain you if we can. And with that, my thanks again to my guests and to the podcast team in helping pull this together. Stay well, everyone.